First, I would like to ask a question about the need for a radical movement. How do we convince those who have achieved a level of affluence that we need fundamental changes in society, a radicalization of society?
Well, first, I think that we have to separate the question of do we need a radical movement from how are we going to convince people who are relatively affluent that we need one. Because I think these are, in fact, two separate questions. The need for a radical movement, in my opinion, in fact, I'll go further than radical, let's say revolutionary movement, however small it may be today, is absolutely necessary because we do have in society, number one, at the present time, extremely reactionary movements. They're here. You know, when people say neither left nor right but forward, and in many cases they really mean backward, they ignore the fact that there is a right in the world today. And our real problem is how are we going to construct the left to oppose that right? In Europe and in the United States, you have in varying degrees literally neo-Nazis, or a new right, to take a lesser degree of, shall we say, reaction that are at work in society. Even in the conventional political spectrum, leaving extremes aside, you have right-wingers everywhere. You have Republican and even Democratic conservatives in the United States, as you do in Britain, as you do equivalently in Germany and throughout the world. So there is a right. It's there. It's visible. It acknowledges itself as a right. The tragedy today that I confront, looking back over many, many years, is that there are many people who are essentially not leftists, but liberals. And more than ever today, because of the growth of the right, we need a left. And the real question is, what kind of left are we talking about? One, let me say, I never confuse the word left with leftish. You know, Clinton may be leftish on this position, Hillary may be leftish on that position, you name it. Reich may be leftish here, and usually he's more center or rightist than most people recognize, rightish. I'm talking of a consolidated, coherent, and very purposeful revolutionary left that is not simply against this or that measure that is being enacted by various governments, but also a left that means to restructure the whole society and sees it fundamentally sick. And the tragedy that I confront today, at least in the United States, and regrettably in many parts of Europe and other parts of the world, is that such a left has more or less disbanded, and very few people today can be regarded as revolutionary leftists, as distinguished from leftish liberals. So my first response is, given the right that exists, and a growing right, let me stress that, one that is growing, we need not simply a quasi-liberal opposition to the growth of the right, but we need a determined revolutionary left to oppose that right, as well as to offer alternatives to that right. And that raises a very important question in itself. The extent to which right-wing movements today use many quasi-leftist approaches, particularly left libertarian approaches, to convince people. For example, what I would regard essentially as a right-wing movement, the Northern League, formerly the Lombardy League in Italy, is using anarchist terminology to win people over to what is ultimately an authoritarian society. They very shrewdly utilize Proudhon, his ideas of federalism, then notions of grassroots democracy, for the very cynical goal of establishing what would ultimately be a regional but authoritarian state in the name of confederation. And I find it tragic that in Italy and I'm only taking Italy as a case in point because you have similar tendencies throughout Europe and even in the North America, I find it very tragic that many left libertarians, be they socialists or anarchists, fail to regroup and formulate a policy based on confederalism, based on grassroots democracy that is really revolutionary, rather than a mere response or a mere philosophical evocation of views that are supposed to countervail the right, or the new right, as it has been called. So therefore, I think the need for a left is imperative. And it is entirely deceptive that we have gone beyond left and right. Far from it. We still have to resolve the problems of left and right before we go beyond them. The second question is how to convince affluent people that we need a left. And looking at that very honestly, I don't believe that we can convince them until they start seeing what is going to happen to them under capitalism. I mean, a great deal can be said, and I don't know if this is the place to do so, or the point to do so, about the emergence or the way in which capitalism is developing. But what capitalism is doing is slowly undermining the very condition that are required for these affluent people to enjoy affluence. Increasingly, a class that thought it was invulnerable to economic crises or downscaling of the standard of living are now being thrown out of work. They're among the largest sector in the United States who are being thrown out of work. Their magnificent homes, or even their modest homes, are being put up for sale. They themselves, here in Burlington, are driving taxi cabs, where before they were electronic engineers or managers or whatever you like for IBM and General Electric. I've had wild experiences since I'm largely or almost paralyzed, and I have to use cabs for often trivial trips through Burlington, Vermont, where I live. I have wild experiences talking to taxi cab drivers who tell me that they were once making, $40 an hour, $30 an hour? In fact, if they were even put on an hourly basis, they were regarded really as salaried employees, and middle management, and to some extent even upper management, who are now driving taxi cabs for $10 an hour and have to totally rescale their living standards. So those people who seem to be living in the comforts of affluence, unless they're very, very old, and are not likely to confront the kind of economic situation that seems to be developing throughout the world. Let me tell you, by the way, everywhere in the world there are conditions right now almost equivalent to the Great Depression of the 1930s. So any such people who feel that they are ensconced in a very comfortable lifestyle, especially if they're younger, had better awaken and find out where the hell they stand. At this particular point, the rate at which technology is replacing labor, and many people are in the middle management or in the so-called affluent classes, seem to be living with assurance, which, by the way, is not the case in reality, that they have job security and that they're going to have affluence for the rest of their lives, or have relatively affluent conditions for the rest of their lives, had better undeceive themselves and recognize that the prognosis for the coming generation, and perhaps the next half century or more, is going to be the real danger of unemployment, downscaling their lifestyles, possibly faced with outright poverty in many cases, and living in continual insecurity and having to change jobs every time one job is eliminated by a technology, only to be replaced by another job that is eliminated by technology. A prognosis has been advanced by the present Clinton administration, or someone in it who knows, who should know, that people will have to change jobs 7 times during their lifetime, each time retraining themselves for something new and probably downscaling their living standards. So obviously, if people who are affluent and reject radicalism do not sense this, It's impossible to talk to them about the issue until they actually experience this downscaling of their lives. Still others who have enough foresight to realize what is happening, namely that they're going to have to change, for all we know, jobs 7 times in their lifetime, and that's assuming that they can even get jobs at various points in their lifetime. That every such individual who can see that will either move to the left or have to move to the right. And we're witnessing this polarization in certain countries today. In Italy right now, it is only the extremes, left and right, and I wouldn't even call the left in Italy very extreme, but left and right, the quasi-fascistic movement on which Mussolini's granddaughter ran, for which, you know, in one of the Italian cities, and the left are the ones who got the largest percentage of votes. And that the middle, notably the so-called socialists in Italy, who are really the equivalent of our Democrats, and the Christian Democrats, who are somewhat the equivalent of our more liberal Republicans, have been squeezed out of the political spectrum. In Canada, just recently, these extremes are dramatic, absolutely dramatic. A party has emerged which is known to be notoriously provincial, reactionary, that has gotten a huge percentage of the vote, and the so-called progressive conservatives around Canada, basically following a liberal policy, have been reduced to non-existence, as well as the social democratic, quotes, left, notably the New Democratic Party. Parties, incidentally, of the center that had as many as 120, say, representatives in the Houses of Parliament in Canada, the House of Commons, such as the liberal, the progressive conservatives and the New Democratic Party, which had a veneer of socialism until it totally disenchanted its more radical following, are now reduced to only 2 or 3 people, where they once had, give or take, 120, 150, I can't give you the exact number, while relatively reactionary regional parties have grown enormously. Parties, in fact, that were established only a few years ago. And this polarization is going to go on and on and on to one degree or another in different parts of the world. So we have yet to see what the outcome will be. Indeed, we do need a revolutionary left and a very radical left, expressly radical left, to countervail the growth of the right. Unless we all want to dissolve and go into and share the common fate of liberalism, which I feel is going to be a very dismal fate, as capitalism begins to, as it were, downscale, disinvest, migrate, or whatever it does, to other countries, or reduce its own workforce in various installations.
After convincing people of all the problems they face, the dangers and devastation of capitalism, how next do you convince people to begin to participate in the radicalization process? People are worried about food on the table. They're worried about feeding their families, living one day to the next. Do they have time to even participate in organizations that may change society?
Well, one of the things I think a revolutionary libertarian left has to do is to start meeting these people on the very terrain of their political lives to the extent that they have, and the economic life, their economic lives. And that means trying to find ways and means of creating grassroots movements. People are less and less responsive today to national parties, often unavoidably tending toward bureaucracies when they don't even have them yet. I cite, for example, the German Greens, who are now a completely bureaucratized party. And so try to reach people on their local levels. Now, I'm not suggesting as a result of